What's the most fucked up thing you saw at a sleepover? Story 1. When I was in elementary school, I got invited with my sister to a birthday party of one of her friends. Everything was going fine for most of the night, and then the catastrophe happened. Her mom came down to the basement and was clearly very upset, but didn't explain why. She then had each of us line up on the stairs from the basement to the ground level of the house and brought us in one by one. I wasn't the first in line, but no one was telling us what happened once it was their turn. Finally, I was up, and her mom took me into the bathroom and showed me a trash can with a poop in it. She was basically on the verge of tears, pointing to the trash can and asking me, "Is this your poop? Is this your poop?" It wasn't. We never found out whose it was, or at least I wasn't told. We have joked that someone will finally come forward on their deathbed, but my sister and I have since lost contact with those girls, so we may never know. Story 2. Sleepover in friend's basement with 4 of us there. I think this was 4th grade. Sometime around midnight, the host friend's dad opened the door at the top of the basement stairs to ask if we wanted snacks. But right as the words started out of his mouth, he comes tumbling down the stairs and hit his head pretty hard. He didn't move for what felt like forever, and we heard from the top of the stairs some delirious yelling. My innocent self thought it was the host's mom, afraid because her husband just tripped and fell. My other friend later explained to me that, no, the host's mom was drunk off her ass and pushed the dad down the stairs, so yeah. I guess I witnessed a wife try to kill her husband. Story 3. I was at a sleepover at a friend's house, and there were about 10 if us bundled into the living room. Me and another girl were last ones up watching some random shit on TV. Think it was Speed. Anyways, one of the girls sat bolt upright, and the light of the TV was reflecting off her face, and her eyes were glazed over, and she wasn't responding to anything we said. She then got up, and we obviously followed her. We guessed at this point she was sleepwalking. Into the kitchen she goes, opens up one of the cupboards, pulls down her pajamas, thrusts her hips forward, and started pissing. We stood there in shock and hysterics. And of course none of us wanted to touch it, so we just kind of shut the door on it. Next day, we could not get her to believe us. Apparently had never sleepwalked before. Story 4. I slept over a friend's house when I was around 10, and we were playing Nintendo. At some point he yelled shit, and without a word his dad comes storming into the room, pulled him up and just started spanking him in front of me. Then took him out into the hallway to scold him. Then he just came back as if nothing happened but with a red face and teary eyes. It was the most awkward, uncomfortable night of my life, having to continue on pretending to have a fun sleepover after that, but I felt so bad for him I did my best. It was what I imagined sleeping over at Butter's house would be like. I have another sleepover story that always sticks in my mind too, but does not deserve its own post, so I'll just summarize here. Watched Aladdin at a birthday party, woke up later that night to friends, older bro jerking off noisily. In his sleeping bag with the movie, paused on a scene of Jasmine. Story 5. Not something I saw, but one of my friends in high school told a group of us girls at a sleepover that she'd been babysitting the previous weekend, and the girl reported to her that she was being molested by her uncle. My friend was so upset and scared to tell her parents. They were family friends, and hadn't told anyone. We made her go upstairs and tell her mom. Her mom called the other family, and we basically heard both her parents sobbing off and on all night. The other parents called the cops. And as far as I recall, the uncle was arrested and spent some time in prison. My friend was really scared she'd have to speak in court, but didn't have to. Story 6. My friend's older brother would get mad at her for small things. Went in his room. Lost the TV remote, shut a door too loudly, and proceed to beat the shit out of her. Pull her hair and hold her down and punch her in the sides, literally throw her across the room. He was almost 10 years older than us, and easily had 100 to 150 lbs on her. He would eventually tire from the beatings, leave the room, and she would go back to playing with me like nothing happened. I remember being so unbelievably shocked by it, but eventually became desensitized because of how normal it seemed to her and how unfazed she was by it. Story 7. I was in the 4th grade when I slept over at a friend's house. It was me and 2 other girls. It was my first time sleeping over at someone else's house. I was always too scared to stay overnight anywhere but her. And we're close, and when I hung out at her house during the day, we always had a great time. Well, I'm not sure what happened, but we were eating popcorn and I spilled some kernels down my shirt. We all ran to the bathroom laughing and got the kernels out. Some ended up in the sink. When her older high school-age brother found out, he proceeded to beat the hell out of her. Me and the other girls ran to her room and shut the door. All we heard was her screaming. I felt so guilty, I just wanted to disappear. She finally came into the room red and covered in tears. We never talked about it again, and I didn't have another sleepover till high school. Story 8. Not really fucked up, but I was terrified one night I slept over at my friend's house. I wake up in the middle of the night because I felt sick. However, my friend wasn't in his bed and both clocks were broken and stuck at some random time like 1:38 a.m. or something. I was convinced that time had frozen and everyone disappeared. I remember crying and being too scared to go downstairs to check the microwave clock. Eventually, I went into his parents' room and woke up his parents. My friend was sleeping in his parents' bed too. Story 9. My best friend at the time had a birthday sleepover, group of 9-year-olds, myself included. My best friend also happened to invite a kid that was often bullied at school. No one in our group had any problems with him, and we just played like kids did. When it came to sleeping downstairs after a fun birthday party, around 2 a.m., the bullied kid started crying quietly to not wake anyone up. I, for some reason, was awake and asked him why he's crying. He began saying that he can't stand getting bullied anymore and wanted to kill himself. For my 9-year-old self at the time, who had no concept of suicide and taking their own life, I could only remember thinking, why would he want to die? It got to a point where I started freaking out because he wouldn't stop crying. I called my best friend's father upstairs. He came down and calmed him down. The bullied kid's parents came to pick him up around 3 a.m. because he would not stop crying. The poor parents didn't know their child had been struggling at school, immediately got him counseling, and his bullies were kicked out of the school after an investigation. From what I saw on social media last year, the kid graduated from university and is doing well. Looking back, it was incredibly sad and terrible that a 9-year-old was thinking about taking their own life. And I am so glad that I called my best friend's dad's help upstairs instead of ignoring him. Story 10. I remember we did a secondary school bonding thing in our first year where you effectively go to a summer camp for the weekend with the whole year group, about 211 to 12-year-olds, to get to know everyone. Sleeping arrangements were in dormitories with bunk beds, separated by gender. About 30 to a room. Lights go out in my dorm, no teachers. Just 30 11 to 12-year-olds that don't know each other that well. A kid farts. Hilarious. Someone else farts, a few others. Then, I vividly remember a distinct sloppy sound followed by a panicked, "Oh," a kid shat himself. I would also like to note, this was not the only public pants shitting by this kid. He did it again, final year, during our Duke of Edinburgh Award expedition overnight. Whilst camping, I was sharing a tent with him. That's a whole different story. Story 11. Kid who had a pee jar in his closet. It was a gallon pickle jar. If he had to pee in the middle of the night, he had to use the jar. Once his mom put us in his room for the night, we weren't allowed to leave his room until she came to get us the next morning. How did they make sure of that? The doorknob was turned around backwards so they could lock us in. The jar was for emergency use only and was emptied and washed in the morning if he used it. Probably rarely used it since most kids that age can hold it all night. He was a bad kid and stayed in trouble. Pretty sure the lock thing was to send him to his room and make sure he stayed there. Don't know about the parents' sexual habits, but I'm not surprised that most of Reddit immediately jumped on the drug-fueled orgies responses. Story 12. I grew up in a very rural area of the southern USA. Middle school girlfriend was having a sleepover, and later in the evening, her mom told us she, the mom, could talk to the spirits of dead people through her daughter. She got her daughter drunk on wine and hypnotized her. I don't know how long we sat in that room, but a lot of time went by with her mom demanding spirits speak through her daughter. Her daughter admitted to all sorts of terrible things. Supposedly, dead people's spirits speaking through her. This was over 30 years ago, and I still remember it. I remember the mom sitting in a chair chain smoking and her daughter slumped over in a chair, seemingly dog-drunk, slurring confessions of murder, suicide, being killed, etc. She told us sometimes spirits would manifest in such a way that her daughter would attack her and tear the house up. It was really strange. Her daughter was a very quiet girl. The things that spoke through her were not like her at all. It was messed up. Story 13. When I was 12, we went on a family trip to Vegas. I woke up in the hotel to my parents having sex in the bed next to me. I was trapped and had nowhere to go. My mom said something along the lines of, "Stop, we're going to wake up the kids." My dad gets up, walks over to our bed and rips the blankets off our faces and said, "See fast asleep." I should have won an Oscar. Story 14. I had a friend whose dad had a fish tank of piranha. I really wanted to feed them a hot dog, but her dad told me they already ate. During the night, I snuck down to where the fish tank was, and there was picked clean fish bones in the tank. The dad was down there watching football, and he spotted me and asked if I still wanted to feed the piranha. Being a small piranha-obsessed child, I nodded and produced the hot dog I saved from the barbecue dinner we had. It was the most terrifying and awesome thing I have ever saw. 10 out of 10 would never want to watch 3 piranha go at a hot dog ever again. At least not in person. Story 15. 9 of us at a friend's mom's house in high school, 17 or 18, woke up and there were 4 of us. One of the guys there was apparently in the mom's room having fun with the guy's mother. The worst part, apparently it wasn't a new thing. The mom had been picking off her sons' friends and fing them to make her ex-husband jealous. Edit. No, I did not get a turn, but then again, I didn't make a pass at her. I don't think he knew his mom was doing it. Everyone was pretty cautious to no spill the beans to him until after graduation. When he did find out, he was more disappointed in his mother than pissed at his friends. Seems like a really weird family dynamic. Story 16. We had put up a tent in my buddy's backyard. There was a catwalk that his backyard had a gate to that went down between the houses and eventually came to a school field. It was late. We were chilling in the tent, laughing and eating snacks, when we heard voices coming down the path. There were shrubs along the fence line, except for the gate area, so they couldn't see us, but we snuck out and hid in the bushes and were going to scare them when they walked past. But the closer they got, the older they sounded. One guy sounded really angry. So we decided to stay super quiet, let them pass, and go back to the tent. When they got just past the house, the dude was pressuring this girl to give him a BJ. Right then and there. She didn't want to, but gave it after asking a couple times. We had to sit there for like 10 minutes until he came and were terrified that if we made a sound, he would see us and kill us. We were probably around 12 years old. Scary shit. Story 17. I was about 10. Stayed over my friend's house. He lived in a sketchy part of Sydney. A whole SBS series was actually released about this area called Struggle Street. And essentially, we stayed up all night, but we could hear shouting and screaming from a few houses down. Curious and scared because we were 10, we went outside to try and see what was going on. When 2 houses down, we saw a woman in like a tank top and tights. She was bruised and was crying, while a man was dragging her by the arm back inside the house. She kept pulling away, so he pushed her. She fell down the 2 steps out front and hit her head on the grass. She didn't get up after that. The ambulance came about an hour later. We still haven't spoken about that night since. Until now, I guess. Story 18. This isn't really that f***ed up, but hilarious. A group of us guys were over at our friend's for his birthday, somewhere around 8 to 10-year-olds. We were playing Monopoly. The game had already been going on for a while and had gotten a little heated. House rule was that if you don't realize someone is on your property before the next roll, rent is forfeited. I roll my dice and land on a property where S had owned the monopoly. I quickly gave my dice to the next player G and he rolled. G moves on before us realized what happened. S blew up. He started yelling and screaming about how I cheated him out of his rent. S ends up taking all of his money and walks away from the board. G starts egging him on, saying things like, "You going to buy some fake toys with that fake money." This pisses of S even more. It escalates into a real wrestle fight. 5, 6 young boys all screaming and wrestling about fake money. Now this all happened somewhere around midnight after an evening of junk food and movie watching. We were in the basement of the house and the parents' bedroom was immediately at the top of the stair. The door in the stairs blows open with the dad. He has his belt in his hands and booms, "If you all don't stop now, I will wipe all of you." That silences us all. We settle down and realize that we should probably be sleeping. We all climb into our sleeping bags to try to sleep. S takes us over to the corner with his money. G whispers, "You still going to buy those fake toys?" We all snicker. To this day, S is still pissed off about that game. That was nearly 40 years ago. Story 19. When I was 9 and in Girl Scouts, we had a trup sleepover party that was relatively unsupervised, and at some point girls just started reaching down each other's pants and ripping their underwear out. Other girls were shoving worn socks in each other's mouths and pulling hair. I just remember sitting in a corner and guarding myself with a ping pong paddle. Story 20. I haven't thought of this in years, but your post reminded me. All of my siblings and my cousins were having a big sleepover at my grandparents' house when my cousin, who's a couple years younger than me, woke me and my sister and told us his bum was itchy. We were half asleep and just told him to go back to bed, but he kept insisting it was really itchy and something was wrong. He pulled down his pajama bottoms and there were little white worms crawling from his bum and falling all over the place. My sister and I were horrified and ran and got our mom, who then woke his mom, and needless to say, we all had to be treated for worms after that because apparently it's highly contagious and we likely all would have wound up like him from being in close quarters, playing all day, etc. The image of his wormy bum is burned into my mind for all eternity.